My name is Madison Harper, and I'm 26 years old. I never thought a single Sunday dinner would change my entire life, but there I stood in my parents' living room, listening to the most ridiculous ultimatum I'd ever heard. My sister Brooklyn had just finished her latest performance, complete with crocodile tears about how I'd supposedly stolen her brilliant marketing ideas for my job at the tech company downtown Austin. The whole extended family was watching as my father crossed his arms and delivered his verdict like some kind of judge. "Madison, you apologize to your sister right now, or you can find somewhere else to live." My mother nodded in agreement, her disappointed expression burning into me. For 26 years, I'd been the responsible one, the one who cleaned up messes and kept the peace. But something inside me had finally snapped. I looked around the room at all their expectant faces, picked up my car keys from the coffee table, and said the two words that would set me free forever: "All right." Before we dive into this story about family betrayal and finding the strength to choose yourself, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story resonates with you or you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming impossible situations. Trust me, what happens next will shock you as much as it shocked my entire family. Now, let's get into how one simple decision changed everything. Brooklyn had been planning this ambush for months, and I was too naive to see it coming. My younger sister had always been jealous of my success, but this latest scheme was her masterpiece of manipulation. At 24, Brooklyn had dropped out of college twice, bounced between retail jobs, and spent most of her time crafting the perfect victim narrative on social media. Meanwhile, I'd worked my way up from an entry-level position to marketing manager at a growing software company, finally earning the respect and financial stability I'd dreamed of since graduation. The trouble started 3 weeks earlier when I'd received a promotion to senior marketing manager. I'd been so excited to share the news at Sunday dinner, but Brooklyn's face had darkened the moment I mentioned my new role developing B2B marketing strategies for tech clients. She'd asked pointed questions about my work, taking notes on her phone like she was genuinely interested in my career for the first time ever. I should have known she was gathering ammunition. This particular Sunday, Brooklyn had arrived early to set the stage. She'd positioned herself strategically on the couch, tissues within reach, our parents flanking her like bodyguards. The extended family was there too: our grandparents, Aunt Martha, Uncle Bill, and my cousin Jake, all gathered for what I thought would be a normal family dinner. Brooklyn waited until everyone was settled in the living room with coffee and dessert before launching her attack. "I need to talk about something that's been really hurting me," Brooklyn began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through old Instagram posts from 2 years ago. "Madison, I know family is supposed to support each other, but what you did with my marketing ideas at your job is just wrong." She showed the room screenshots of her old Instagram captions about authentic marketing and building genuine connections with customers, generic inspiration quotes she'd copied from other influencers. My parents leaned forward, immediately invested in Brooklyn's performance. "What do you mean, honey?" my mother asked, shooting me a suspicious glare that I knew all too well. This was the look that said I was already guilty before I'd even opened my mouth to defend myself. Brooklyn's tears began flowing as she explained how I'd supposedly stolen her groundbreaking social media insights for my recent presentation to company executives. According to her version of events, I'd taken her creative vision about authentic marketing and passed it off as my own brilliant strategy. The fact that my work involved completely different industries, that I was developing B2B software marketing campaigns while she posted lifestyle content for her 300 Instagram followers, seemed irrelevant to everyone in the room except me. "Brooklyn, that's completely ridiculous," I tried to explain, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "My work is business-to-business marketing for software companies. Your Instagram posts are about fashion and lifestyle content. They're not even remotely related." But I could see from my parents' expressions that logic wasn't going to win this battle. My father, Richard, had always been Brooklyn's champion. At 52, he ran a small insurance agency and prided himself on being able to read people's character. Unfortunately, he'd never been able to see through Brooklyn's manipulations. "Madison, your sister is telling us that you used her ideas without giving her credit. That's stealing, plain and simple." The room felt like it was spinning as I watched my family choose sides without hearing a single piece of actual evidence. Brooklyn had prepared for this moment perfectly, complete with crocodile tears and a wounded expression that could have won her an Academy Award. She'd even printed out her old Instagram posts and highlighted phrases like authentic connection and genuine marketing, as if these generic buzzwords were proprietary concepts she'd invented. Aunt Martha tried to speak up in my defense. "Now wait just a minute, I think we should hear both sides before jumping to conclusions." But my mother quickly shut her down with a sharp look that could have frozen fire. "Martha, this is between our daughters. Brooklyn is clearly upset, and Madison needs to take responsibility for her actions." I realized in that moment that this wasn't really about marketing ideas or professional ethics. This was about the family dynamic that had been poisoning our relationships for decades. Brooklyn was the creative, sensitive one who needed protection and support. I was the responsible, successful one who was supposed to handle problems and make sacrifices for everyone else's comfort. The pattern had been so ingrained for so long that nobody even questioned it anymore. Brooklyn's boyfriend Tyler sat in the corner looking uncomfortable, but he didn't say a word to defend me or question Brooklyn's story. I'd always gotten along well with Tyler, and I could see in his eyes that he wasn't entirely convinced by Brooklyn's performance, but he wasn't brave enough to contradict her either. As Brooklyn continued her tearful monologue about how betrayed she felt, I found myself thinking about all the times this exact scenario had played out before. In middle school, when Brooklyn had broken my science fair project the night before it was due, I'd been punished for not sharing my materials nicely. In high school, when Brooklyn had spread rumors about me dating her crush, I'd been grounded for not being a supportive sister. The pattern was so consistent I could have written the script myself. My father stood up, his decision already made. "Madison, I'm not going to sit here and watch you hurt your sister like this. You're going to apologize for taking her ideas, and you're going to make this right." The room fell silent as everyone waited for my response. This was my cue to break down, to beg for forgiveness, to play my assigned role in the family drama. But something had shifted inside me during Brooklyn's performance. Maybe it was the promotion at work that had finally given me confidence in my own abilities. Maybe it was the therapy I'd been doing to deal with workplace stress. Or maybe I'd just finally reached my breaking point with this toxic family dynamic. Instead of the expected tears and apologies, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Brooklyn, you and I both know that's not what happened," I said quietly, looking directly into her eyes. "And if Mom and Dad want to believe your story without asking for any proof, that's their choice." I picked up my purse from the side table and walked toward the door, leaving behind the shocked silence and Brooklyn's suddenly panicked expression. The silence in the room was deafening as I collected my jacket from the hall closet. My hands were surprisingly steady as I checked my purse for my car keys, even though my heart was pounding like I'd just run a marathon. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life, but actually living it felt surreal. "Madison, where exactly do you think you're going?" my father demanded, his voice carrying the authority he'd used to control family discussions for decades. He clearly expected me to turn around, apologize for my dramatic exit, and beg for another chance to make things right with Brooklyn. Instead, I paused at the front door and turned back to face the room full of stunned family members. "You gave me two choices, Dad. Apologize for something I didn't do, or find somewhere else to live." I chose. My voice was calm, almost eerily so, which seemed to unnerve everyone more than if I'd screamed or slammed the door. Brooklyn's carefully crafted expression of wounded innocence was cracking around the edges. She'd expected her manipulation to result in another victory, another instance of Madison being forced to grovel and accept blame for Brooklyn's problems. The possibility that I might actually choose to leave had clearly never occurred to her. "Madison, honey, let's just talk about this like adults," my mother tried, using her sweetest voice that she reserved for defusing family emergencies. "I'm sure we can work something out if you just apologize to Brooklyn. She's willing to forgive you." But there was still that underlying tone that suggested I was being unreasonable, that I was the problem that needed to be fixed. My cousin Jake, who was 28 and had always been more like a brother to me than Brooklyn ever was, caught my eye from across the room. I could see something like pride in his expression, and he gave me the slightest nod of encouragement. "Good for you, Maddie," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Uncle Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could see him exchanging glances with Aunt Martha. They'd witnessed decades of this family dynamic, and I suspected they were starting to question what they'd just seen. But Grandpa Joe just shook his head in disappointment, clearly siding with my parents' assessment that I was being disrespectful and stubborn. "This is absolutely ridiculous," my mother continued, her voice rising with frustration. "You're embarrassing yourself and this entire family over a simple misunderstanding. Just apologize to your sister and we can move on from this childishness." I opened the front door and felt the cool Austin evening air hit my face. It felt like freedom. "I hope you all have a nice dinner," I said, and walked out without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Brooklyn's voice rising in panic as she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. The drive to my downtown apartment took 15 minutes, but it felt like I was traveling between two completely different worlds. I lived in a converted loft in the Arts District, a space I'd worked hard to afford and decorate exactly how I wanted. It was mine, paid for with money I'd earned through my own efforts, and for the first time in my life, I truly appreciated what that independence meant. My phone started buzzing before I'd even made it up the stairs to my front door. Text messages were flooding in from family members who'd apparently been recruited into the crisis management effort. Brooklyn's messages were a masterpiece of manipulative concern. "Maddie, please come back. I forgive you for taking my ideas. I just want my sister back." The subtext was clear, she was still painting herself as the generous victim, graciously offering forgiveness for my supposed crimes. My parents' messages were more direct. "This is childish behavior, Madison. You're embarrassing the entire family and proving that you can't handle adult conflict resolution." My father's text was particularly telling. "I hope you're proud of yourself for walking out on family like that. Very mature response to being asked to take responsibility for your actions." But not all the messages were negative. Aunt Martha sent a private text saying she thought there might be more to the story than what Brooklyn had presented. My cousin Jake was more direct. "About time you stood up for yourself." That was epic. Even Tyler, Brooklyn's boyfriend, sent a confused message asking if I was okay and suggesting that maybe everyone should take some time to cool down before making any permanent decisions. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine, then sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about managing Brooklyn's emotions or anticipating the next family crisis I'd be expected to solve. I wasn't calculating how to keep everyone happy while sacrificing my own needs. I was just Madison, sitting in my own space, accountable only to myself. The next morning brought a new wave of messages, and I could see that Brooklyn had escalated her campaign overnight. She'd posted on social media about toxic family members who abandon you when you need support most. The post was carefully worded to generate maximum sympathy without providing any context about what had actually happened. Her friends were responding with heart emojis and supportive comments about how sorry they were that she was going through such a difficult time. My parents had shared Brooklyn's post, adding their own commentary about being heartbroken over a family member who'd chosen pride over love. The narrative being constructed was clear. Madison was the selfish sister who'd abandoned her family during a crisis, while Brooklyn was the innocent victim trying to hold everyone together. But I noticed something interesting in the responses. Several family friends were asking for more details about what had happened. A few of my parents' church acquaintances were commenting that they remembered me as a responsible, kind young woman and couldn't imagine me doing anything deliberately hurtful. The narrative wasn't as universally accepted as my family had probably hoped. At work that Monday, I threw myself into projects with an energy I hadn't felt in months. My boss, Sarah Martinez, commented that my recent presentation had been particularly strong and asked if I'd be interested in taking on some additional responsibilities. For the first time, I said yes without worrying about how additional work commitments might affect my availability for family emergencies. My colleagues seemed to notice a change in my demeanor too. I was more confident in meetings, more willing to advocate for my ideas, and less concerned about avoiding conflict. It was as if removing the constant stress of managing family drama had freed up mental and emotional energy I didn't even realize I'd been expending. But Brooklyn wasn't finished with her campaign. She'd started reaching out to mutual friends, family acquaintances, and anyone else who might have influence with me. Her story was getting more elaborate with each telling, and now included details about how I'd always been jealous of her creativity and had finally acted on that jealousy in a professional setting. The really troubling part was that some people were starting to believe her version of events, simply because she was putting so much effort into telling it. Brooklyn had always been charismatic and persuasive when she wanted to be, and she was using every tool in her manipulation arsenal to paint herself as the wronged party. I realized I was about to learn exactly who in my life was willing to hear both sides of a story before making judgments, and who was susceptible to Brooklyn's particular brand of emotional manipulation. It was going to be an education I hadn't expected, but one that would prove invaluable in the months to come. Within a week of my departure, it became clear that my family wasn't going to accept my decision gracefully. What started as disappointed text messages quickly escalated into a coordinated campaign to force me back into my assigned role as the family peacekeeper. My parents had apparently decided that if gentle persuasion wouldn't work, they'd try recruiting every possible ally to convince me I was making a terrible mistake. My grandmother called first, her voice heavy with disappointment as she explained that my parents had told her about my disrespectful behavior toward Brooklyn. According to their version of events, I'd not only stolen my sister's creative ideas but had also abandoned the family when confronted about my actions. Grandma Rose had always been one of my strongest supporters, so hearing her express disappointment in my character choices was particularly painful. "Maddie, dear, I know you're upset, but family is forever. Pride comes before the fall, and I hate to see you throwing away your relationships over something that could be fixed with a simple apology." The calls kept coming. Uncle Bill phoned to suggest that maybe I was having some kind of stress-related breakdown and should consider taking time off work to focus on family healing. Aunt Linda, who lived in Dallas and barely knew our family dynamics, called to lecture me about the importance of sibling loyalty. Even my parents' church friends started reaching out, having been told that their prayers were needed for a family crisis involving a daughter who'd lost her way. But the most disturbing development was that someone had started interfering with my professional life. My boss Sarah received an anonymous phone call questioning my character and suggesting that I might be unstable or dishonest. The caller claimed to be a concerned family member who felt obligated to warn my employer about concerning behavioral changes they'd noticed in me recently. Sarah handled the situation professionally, calling me into her office to discuss what she described as unusual external interference in my work environment. She assured me that my job performance spoke for itself and that she had no concerns about my professionalism or integrity, but she wanted me to be aware that someone was actively trying to damage my reputation. "Madison, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but this kind of workplace sabotage is serious," Sarah explained. "Whoever made that call provided specific details about your family situation that suggests they know you personally. Is there anything you need to tell me about a potential security risk or harassment situation?" I found myself explaining the family conflict to my boss, feeling simultaneously embarrassed and grateful for her support. Sarah listened without judgment and suggested that I document everything in case the situation escalated to the point where legal intervention became necessary. She also implemented some additional security measures to prevent unauthorized people from accessing information about my employment or contacting my colleagues. Meanwhile, Brooklyn's social media campaign was intensifying. She'd moved beyond subtle posts about family betrayal to more direct attacks on my character. She shared childhood photos of us together with captions about how she'd always looked up to her big sister and couldn't understand how I'd become so cold and calculating. She posted inspirational quotes about forgiveness and family loyalty, clearly aimed at making me look petty and vindictive for refusing to apologize. The most insidious part of Brooklyn's strategy was how she positioned herself as the concerned sister trying to repair our relationship. She posted about sending me flowers and letters that I was supposedly ignoring, painting me as unreasonable and unforgiving. Of course, no flowers or letters ever arrived, but her followers had no way of knowing that. Brooklyn also started reaching out to my college friends and former colleagues, expressing fake concern about my mental health and asking if they'd noticed any concerning changes in my behavior. She painted a picture of a sister who was worried about my well-being but didn't know how to help someone who was clearly struggling with jealousy and professional stress. Some of these friends reached out to me directly, genuinely concerned about the stories Brooklyn was telling. It was heartbreaking to realize that people I cared about were being manipulated into believing that I was having some kind of breakdown. I found myself having to defend my mental health and professional integrity to people who should have known me better than to believe such stories without question. The harassment took an even more serious turn when someone called in a false report about my car being abandoned at my apartment complex. I came home from work to find a towing notice attached to my windshield and had to spend an evening dealing with the property management company to prevent my vehicle from being impounded. The timing was too coincidental to be anything other than deliberate sabotage. Around this same time, I received a call from my apartment complex's office informing me that they'd received complaints about loud parties and disturbing noise coming from my unit. Since I'd been living a quiet, low-key lifestyle focused on work and personal healing, these complaints were obviously fabricated. The property manager was apologetic but explained that they were required to investigate all noise complaints and would need to document the issue in my file. Brooklyn's boyfriend Tyler started showing signs of discomfort with the escalating situation. He sent me a private message expressing confusion about the family conflict and suggesting that maybe everyone should step back and let emotions cool down. Reading between the lines, I got the impression that Tyler was witnessing Brooklyn's obsessive behavior firsthand and wasn't entirely comfortable with what he was seeing. My workplace received another anonymous call, this time to our human resources department. The caller claimed that I'd been stealing company property and using work resources for personal projects. HR Director Janet Wu called me in for a meeting to discuss what she termed malicious and false accusations that were clearly being made in bad faith. Madison, someone is working very hard to damage your professional reputation, Janet explained. These accusations are so outrageous and easily disproven that it's clear they're coming from someone who doesn't understand your actual job responsibilities. We're going to document these incidents and may need to involve law enforcement if the harassment continues. I realized that my decision to walk away from my family's dysfunction had triggered a response far more extreme than I'd anticipated. Brooklyn wasn't just angry about my refusal to apologize. She was systematically trying to destroy every aspect of my life outside the family system. If she couldn't force me back into my assigned role, she was going to make sure I paid the price for my independence. But something unexpected was happening alongside all this harassment. I was discovering reserves of strength and resilience I didn't know I possessed. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, I was becoming more determined to build a life based on my own values and choices. Every attempt to sabotage my professional success only made me more focused on excelling at work. Every false accusation only clarified how toxic my family environment had become. I started therapy with Dr. Patricia Valdez, a psychologist who specialized in family systems and emotional abuse. Dr. Valdez helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a classic response to someone leaving a dysfunctional family role. The harassment and sabotage weren't signs that I'd made a mistake. They were proof that I'd been trapped in a system that only worked when I sacrificed my own well-being for everyone else's comfort. My support network was also expanding in unexpected ways. Colleagues who learned about the harassment offered their assistance and support. My neighbors, who'd witnessed some of the suspicious activity around my apartment, volunteered to keep an eye out for any concerning behavior. Even some extended family members started reaching out privately to express support for my decision to prioritize my own mental health. But the most significant development was meeting Mark Rodriguez, an architect who lived in my building. Mark had noticed the towing notice incident and offered to help me navigate the property management bureaucracy. Our conversation led to coffee, which led to more conversations about the challenges of dealing with toxic family dynamics. Mark had his own experience with setting boundaries with difficult relatives, and he became an invaluable source of support and understanding during this turbulent time. As the harassment campaign intensified, I found myself building a new kind of family, one based on mutual respect, genuine care, and healthy boundaries. It was becoming clear that walking away from my biological family's dysfunction was creating space for much healthier relationships to develop. 3 months after my dramatic exit from Sunday dinner, Brooklyn's behavior had crossed the line from petty harassment into genuinely concerning territory. Her obsession with my activities had become her full-time occupation, and the elaborate lengths she was going to monitor and interfere with my life were starting to frighten even me. Tyler, Brooklyn's boyfriend, reached out to me through my cousin Jake with disturbing information about what he was witnessing at home. According to Tyler, Brooklyn had created detailed spreadsheets tracking my social media activity, work schedule, and even the restaurants I visited based on my credit card statements she somehow accessed through our parents' shared family phone plan. She'd printed out photos from my LinkedIn profile and covered them with angry red ink, circling my face and writing comments about how fake my smile looked. The breaking point came when Brooklyn showed up at my office building on a Tuesday afternoon, creating such a scene in the lobby that security had to be called. She'd somehow obtained a visitor's badge by claiming to be my sister delivering urgent family news, but once inside, she began shouting accusations about me being a thief and a liar who'd stolen her life's work. "That woman stole everything from me." Brooklyn screamed at the security guards who were trying to escort her from the building. "She took my marketing ideas and passed them off as her own, and now she's hiding behind corporate lawyers because she knows I'm right." Several of my colleagues witnessed the outburst, including potential clients who were visiting for a presentation meeting. The security footage later showed Brooklyn pacing frantically in the lobby for 20 minutes before the confrontation, practicing her speech and working herself into an emotional frenzy. She'd brought printed copies of her old Instagram posts, business cards from a marketing consulting company she claimed to have started, and a notebook filled with what she called evidence of my professional fraud. When the police arrived, Brooklyn immediately switched tactics, breaking down in tears and claiming that I'd stolen money from a family business to fund my lifestyle. This was particularly absurd since our family had never owned any kind of business, but Brooklyn's performance was convincing enough that the officers had to investigate her claims before determining they were baseless. My boss Sarah handled the situation with incredible professionalism, but she was clearly shaken by the incident. "Madison, this has moved beyond family drama into potential workplace violence territory," she explained during our emergency meeting that afternoon. "We're going to need to implement additional security measures and consider pursuing legal action to protect our employees and clients." That evening, Tyler sent me a longer message through Jake explaining that he couldn't continue enabling Brooklyn's behavior. He discovered that she'd been using his credit card to hire private investigators to track my movements, and she'd created fake social media profiles to befriend my colleagues and gather information about my work projects. The final straw for Tyler was finding Brooklyn's journal, which contained detailed fantasies about sabotaging my career and forcing me to come crawling back to the family. "Madison, I'm really sorry about everything Brooklyn has put you through," Tyler wrote. "I thought she was just hurt and processing the family conflict in an unhealthy way, but this has become something much more serious. She's not sleeping, she's not working, and she spends all day researching ways to contact your clients and coworkers. I can't be part of this anymore." Tyler's departure created a cascade of consequences that destabilized Brooklyn's entire support system. Without his income and emotional validation, she was forced to move back in with our parents, who were finally beginning to see glimpses of the monster they'd helped create. Brooklyn's behavior at home became increasingly erratic, with explosive tantrums whenever our parents suggested she focus on her own life instead of obsessing over mine. Meanwhile, my professional life was flourishing despite the harassment. The incident at my office had actually strengthened my relationships with colleagues, who were impressed by how calmly I'd handled such a disturbing situation. Sarah recommended me for a leadership development program, and I was invited to present at a regional marketing conference about crisis communication strategies. My personal life was also becoming more fulfilling than it had ever been. My relationship with Mark had developed into something beautiful and supportive, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. Mark understood the challenges of dealing with toxic family dynamics from his own experience, and he provided emotional support without trying to fix my problems or minimize the seriousness of Brooklyn's harassment. I'd also discovered hobbies and interests that I'd never had time to explore while managing family crises. I started rock climbing at an indoor gym, joined a photography club, and began taking cooking classes on weekends. For the first time in my adult life, I had energy and emotional capacity for personal growth and creative pursuits. But Brooklyn wasn't finished with her campaign of destruction. She'd started contacting my clients directly, calling their offices with elaborate stories about my unprofessional conduct and questionable business practices. One particularly damaging incident involved Brooklyn calling our biggest client and claiming that I'd plagiarized their marketing materials from her personal blog. The client forwarded Brooklyn's voicemail to our company, which allowed us to document the harassment and demonstrate that her claims were completely fabricated. However, the incident created additional work for our account management team and could have seriously damaged our business relationship if not handled carefully. My lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, whom I'd hired after the office building incident, advised me that Brooklyn's behavior had escalated to criminal harassment territory. We began documenting every incident of contact, false accusation, and attempted sabotage to build a case for a restraining order. Jennifer also sent cease and desist letters to Brooklyn and our parents, warning them that continued harassment would result in legal consequences. Madison, what you're experiencing is called stalking, and it's a serious crime, Jennifer explained. Your sister's behavior shows a pattern of obsessive monitoring, false accusations, and deliberate interference with your work and personal life. The fact that she's recruiting family members to participate in the harassment makes this even more concerning from a legal perspective. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following month, but Brooklyn seemed to sense that her time was running out. Her social media posts became increasingly unhinged, with rambling accusations about corporate conspiracies and family betrayal. She posted my work address and encouraged her followers to contact my company with their concerns about my character. Even more disturbing was Brooklyn's attempt to turn our extended family against me by spreading increasingly elaborate lies about my behavior. She claimed that I'd threatened her physically, that I'd stolen family heirlooms, and that I was using drugs to cope with the stress of my fraudulent career. Some relatives believed these stories initially, but the sheer volume and inconsistency of Brooklyn's accusations eventually made thoughtful family members question her credibility. My cousin Jake became an invaluable ally during this period, serving as a bridge between me and the relatives who were beginning to see through Brooklyn's manipulation. Jake shared screenshots of Brooklyn's most unhinged social media posts with other family members, helping them understand the extent of her obsessive behavior. Aunt Martha finally confronted my parents directly about their role in enabling Brooklyn's harassment campaign. According to Jake, the conversation was explosive, with Martha demanding to know how they could stand by while their daughter systematically tried to destroy her sister's life and career. "Richard and Diane, you've created a monster," Martha reportedly told my parents. "Brooklyn isn't a concerned sister trying to repair a relationship. She's a grown woman stalking and harassing her sibling because you taught her that Madison's job in this family is to absorb abuse and sacrifice her own well-being for everyone else's comfort." But my parents remained convinced that I was the problem, that my refusal to apologize to Brooklyn had caused all the subsequent chaos. They couldn't see that Brooklyn's behavior was proving exactly why I'd needed to distance myself from the family dynamic in the first place. As the restraining order hearing approached, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. I was sad that my relationship with my biological family had deteriorated to the point where legal intervention was necessary, but I was determined to protect the new life I was building based on healthy boundaries and mutual respect. The most powerful realization was that walking away from my family's dysfunction hadn't made me weak or selfish. It had revealed strength I didn't know I possessed and opened doors to relationships and opportunities that would never have been possible while I was trapped in the role of family scapegoat and crisis manager. The weeks leading up to the restraining order hearing brought revelations that shattered any remaining illusions about Brooklyn's mental state and my parents' willingness to acknowledge reality. Tyler's decision to leave Brooklyn had created a domino effect that exposed the full extent of her obsessive behavior and my family's enabling patterns. Tyler contacted me directly through my lawyer's office, providing a manila envelope filled with evidence that made my stomach turn. Inside were printed screenshots of Brooklyn's private social media accounts where she'd been posting obsessively about me under fake names, photos she'd taken of my apartment building from her car during surveillance sessions, and copies of the fake complaints she'd filed with various agencies claiming I was everything from a tax evader to a drug dealer. The most disturbing item in Tyler's evidence collection was Brooklyn's handwritten journal, which she'd apparently forgotten in his car during one of her stalking expeditions. The journal entries revealed a level of obsession that went far beyond sibling rivalry into genuine delusion. Brooklyn had written detailed fantasies about scenarios where I would lose my job, my apartment, and my relationship with Mark, forcing me to return home and beg for her forgiveness. Day 47 since Madison abandoned the family, read one entry from early March. Called her office again today pretending to be a concerned client. The receptionist is getting suspicious, so I need to change tactics. Tyler thinks I should let this go, but he doesn't understand that Madison needs to learn consequences for her actions. She's always gotten away with everything because she's supposedly the responsible one, but I'm going to prove that she's actually selfish and cruel. Another entry detailed Brooklyn's plan to create a fake business website using my name and credentials, then contact my actual clients claiming that I'd stolen the company from her. She'd researched the legal requirements for business registration in Texas and had even drafted fraudulent documents claiming that we'd been business partners before I'd cheated her out of her share of the profits. Tyler's breakup with Brooklyn had been triggered by her reaction to my recent promotion to senior marketing director, which had been announced in the company newsletter and local business journal. According to Tyler, Brooklyn had a complete meltdown upon seeing the article, throwing furniture and screaming that I was stealing the life that should have been hers. She kept saying that you were supposed to fail without the family's support, Tyler explained to my lawyer. Brooklyn was convinced that cutting you off would force you to come back and apologize, and when your career kept succeeding anyway, she completely lost it. She started talking about how she needed to make sure you lost everything so you'd understand how much you needed the family. Tyler's evidence also included recordings he'd made of Brooklyn's phone calls to various agencies and employers, creating false reports about my behavior and professional conduct. The recordings clearly showed Brooklyn using different voices and fake names, sometimes claiming to be a former coworker, sometimes a concerned family member, and sometimes an anonymous tipster reporting suspected fraud or misconduct. My lawyer Jennifer was astounded by the scope of Brooklyn's harassment campaign. Madison, this is one of the most comprehensive stalking cases I've ever seen, she explained. Your sister has been essentially running a full-time operation to destroy your life, and she's been documenting her own criminal behavior in writing. These journal entries and recordings are going to make the restraining order hearing very straightforward. But even with overwhelming evidence of Brooklyn's stalking behavior, my parents continued to defend her and blame me for the family crisis. When Jennifer sent copies of the evidence to their lawyer as part of the legal proceedings, my father's response was to call my workplace and demand to speak with my boss about my vindictive behavior toward my sister. Mr. Harper, your daughter has been stalking and harassing Madison for months, Sarah explained to my father during what she later described as one of the most bizarre phone calls of her professional career. We have documented evidence of false reports, fake complaints, and attempted sabotage of our business relationships. This isn't a family disagreement, this is criminal behavior. My father's response, according to Sarah, was to accuse my company of enabling my destruction of family relationships and to threaten legal action against my employer for supporting a daughter who abandoned her family. Sarah documented the call as another incident of harassment and forwarded the recording to Jennifer for inclusion in our legal case. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early May. Jennifer had prepared a comprehensive presentation including Tyler's evidence, documentation of the workplace harassment, recordings of false reports Brooklyn had made to various agencies, and testimony from several witnesses including Sarah, my landlord, and even the security guard from my office building. Brooklyn's behavior in the weeks leading up to the hearing became increasingly erratic. She violated the temporary restraining order by showing up at my rock climbing gym on a Tuesday evening, confronting me in the parking lot with accusations that I was destroying the family and demands that I drop the legal proceedings. "Madison, you're being ridiculous," Brooklyn screamed as other gym members watched in shock. "I'm your sister, and sisters fight sometimes. You don't need to involve lawyers and courts in a family disagreement. Just come home and apologize, and we can forget this whole thing ever happened." The gym's security cameras captured the entire confrontation, including Brooklyn's admission that she'd been keeping track of my schedule to know when I'd be leaving the gym. She also revealed that our parents had given her money to hire a private investigator to monitor my activities, thinking they were helping her gather evidence of my supposed wrongdoing. Mark, who'd been waiting for me in the parking lot, witnessed the confrontation and immediately called 911. Brooklyn was arrested for violating the temporary restraining order, and the incident provided additional evidence for our case. The arrest report noted that Brooklyn had my work schedule, gym membership information, and Mark's license plate number written on a piece of paper in her purse. The arrest seemed to finally shock my parents into recognizing that Brooklyn's behavior had crossed legal boundaries. According to cousin Jake, who remained my source of information about family developments, our parents were horrified to get a call from the Travis County Jail asking them to bail out their daughter. But instead of using the arrest as a wake-up call to address Brooklyn's mental health issues, my parents doubled down on their belief that I was the real problem. They hired an expensive criminal defense lawyer for Brooklyn and began spreading the story that I was using my corporate connections to persecute my sister through the legal system. The night before the restraining order hearing, I received a bouquet of flowers at my apartment with a card that read, "We forgive you for everything. Please come home. Love, Mom and Dad." The gesture felt like another manipulation, an attempt to portray themselves as the generous parents reaching out to their wayward daughter. But I was no longer the same person who'd walked out of that Sunday dinner 6 months earlier. The harassment campaign had been traumatic, but it had also shown me exactly why I'd needed to escape my family's toxic dynamics. Brooklyn's behavior wasn't an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of a family system that had always prioritized her needs and emotions over everyone else's well-being and boundaries. As I prepared for the court hearing, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose I'd never experienced before. I wasn't trying to destroy my sister or punish my parents. I was simply protecting myself and the new life I'd built based on healthy relationships and mutual respect. The legal system would determine whether Brooklyn's behavior constituted criminal harassment, but regardless of the outcome, I knew I'd made the right choice in prioritizing my own safety and sanity. The transformation was complete. The people-pleasing, conflict-avoiding daughter who'd spent 26 years managing everyone else's emotions had become a woman capable of standing up for herself in a court of law. Tomorrow would bring the legal resolution, but I'd already won the most important battle by choosing to value my own well-being enough to fight for it. The Monday after Sophia's wedding brought news that crystallized just how completely my family had prioritized celebration over survival. While I was meeting with Dr. Hayes about Ethan's treatment options and our rapidly approaching deadline for the experimental protocol, my parents were at the travel agency finalizing plans for Sophia and Preston's honeymoon. Not just any honeymoon, but a month-long European adventure that cost $35,000 and included first-class flights, luxury hotels, and private tours of places most people only see in magazines. $35,000 for a honeymoon. Nearly half of what we needed to save Ethan's life, spent on a vacation that would create memories instead of preserving a life. The math was so simple that a child could understand it, but somehow my parents had convinced themselves that their daughter's happiness was worth more than their grandson's survival. When I learned about the honeymoon expenses from Sophia's enthusiastic social media posts, I felt something inside me break completely. Ethan's condition during this time was deteriorating in ways that terrified every medical professional involved in his care. His response to the basic chemotherapy had been minimal, and Dr. Hayes explained that without the experimental treatment, we were looking at a much longer battle with much lower odds of success. The 48-hour deadline for the treatment decision had passed, and we were now facing the reality of fighting cancer with one hand tied behind our backs because of financial limitations. The treatment deadline created a crisis that forced me to reach out to every member of our extended family, hoping that someone would have the decency to help a dying child even if his parents and grandparents wouldn't. I called aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years, cousins who barely knew Ethan's name, and family friends who had always claimed to care about all of us. The responses were uniform and devastating. My parents had gotten to them first. According to the family narrative that my parents had carefully constructed, I was using Ethan's illness to manipulate people and steal attention from Sophia's happiness. They had told everyone that I was exaggerating his condition, that the expensive treatment wasn't really necessary, and that I was being dramatic and irresponsible by not accepting the basic care that insurance would cover. They had systematically destroyed any possibility of family support by framing my desperation as manipulation. My grandmother's phone call was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all the rejections. This was the woman who had taught me to bake cookies and read me bedtime stories when my parents were too busy with work. She had babysat Ethan countless times and claimed to adore him. But when I called to explain his condition and ask for help, she lectured me about causing family drama and suggested that I should be grateful for the basic treatment options instead of demanding luxury care that we couldn't afford. Luxury care. Experimental treatment that could save my son's life was being characterized as a luxury rather than a necessity. The same family that had just spent more money on flowers for one wedding than most people spent on their cars was calling life-saving medical treatment an unnecessary indulgence. The cognitive dissonance was so complete that I began to wonder if I was the one who was crazy. When Sophia and Preston returned from their honeymoon, tanned and glowing and full of stories about five-star restaurants and private yacht tours, they came to my parents' house for a welcome home dinner that cost more than my monthly salary. They brought gifts for everyone, expensive trinkets from European boutiques that they'd purchased without thinking twice about the cost. For Ethan, if they remembered him at all, there was nothing. The ultimatum meeting happened 3 days after the newlyweds returned from their month of luxury. My parents invited me to their house under the pretense of discussing family matters, and I arrived with medical bills and treatment information, hoping that seeing the numbers in black and white might finally break through their wall of denial. Instead, I walked into what felt like an intervention designed to stop my inappropriate behavior. The meeting took place in the same living room where I'd played as a child, surrounded by wedding photos and honeymoon souvenirs that represented more money than I would see in years. My father sat in his usual chair, my mother on the couch with a notebook where she'd apparently prepared talking points, and Sophia and Preston flanked them like reinforcements in case I became too emotional or difficult to handle. Their position was presented with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for business meetings. They had already spent more money on family celebrations than they could comfortably afford, and it wouldn't be fair to Sophia and Preston's future to suddenly change their financial priorities. Besides, there were programs and charities designed to help people in my situation. I should be more resourceful and stop expecting family to solve problems that I should handle independently. The devastating rejection was delivered with condescending patience, as if they were explaining simple mathematics to someone too dim to understand basic concepts. They had made their financial commitments to Sophia's happiness, and it would be irresponsible to suddenly redirect that money toward Ethan's medical care. They actually used the phrase, throwing good money after bad, when referring to the experimental treatment that could save their grandson's life. But the fifth betrayal was still coming, and it was worse than anything I could have imagined. During this same meeting, while explaining why they couldn't help with Ethan's treatment, my parents revealed that they were planning to help Sophia and Preston buy their first house. Not a small down payment assistance, but a substantial gift that would allow them to purchase a home in the most expensive neighborhood in the city. The amount they were planning to give the newlyweds was over $100,000. $100,000 for a house while refusing $80,000 to save a life. The priority structure was so twisted that it defied every concept of love, family, and basic human decency that I had ever learned. They could find 6 figures to ensure that Sophia lived in luxury, but they couldn't find 5 figures to ensure that Ethan lived at all. The discovery of the secret savings account was the final insult. While researching financial assistance programs, I learned that my parents had been lying about their financial constraints the entire time. They had a separate savings account that they'd never mentioned, containing enough money to pay for Ethan's treatment twice over. This account was being preserved for family emergencies and future security, but apparently a 4-year-old's cancer didn't qualify as either. When I confronted them about the secret account, my mother actually seemed annoyed that I had discovered it. According to her explanation, that money was earmarked for important family needs, not medical expenses that should be handled through other channels. The logical inconsistencies were breathtaking. They could spend over $200,000 on a wedding and promise over $100,000 for a house, but $80,000 for cancer treatment was financially impossible because of a secret account that existed specifically for family emergencies. The complete betrayal was delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that suggested they'd never really considered Ethan to be part of their family at all. Their family consisted of themselves, Sophia, and Preston. Everyone else, including their dying grandson, was peripheral and expendable. The realization that I had spent 4 years believing my son was loved by these people when he was actually just tolerated was almost as devastating as watching him fight cancer. The morning after my family's final rejection, I woke up in the hospital chair where I'd been sleeping next to Ethan's bed and realized that waiting for them to develop basic human decency was going to kill my son. If I wanted him to survive, I was going to have to fight for his life in ways that my family should have been fighting alongside me. The first person who offered real help instead of empty sympathy was someone I'd met only days before, but who showed more concern for Ethan than his own grandparents had. Michael Chen, a hospital administrator who specialized in helping families navigate financial assistance programs, found me crying in the billing office while trying to understand payment plans that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Instead of handing me more paperwork and walking away like most administrators would have done, he sat down and listened to our story with the kind of attention that I hadn't received from my own family. When I finished explaining about the wedding expenses and the refused help, his expression shifted from professional sympathy to genuine anger. Michael had worked at Children's Hospital for 12 years and had seen every possible family configuration react to childhood cancer. He'd seen families mortgage their homes, sell their businesses, and sacrifice everything to save their children. He'd also seen families torn apart by the stress and expense of treatment. But he had never seen a family deliberately choose luxury spending over life-saving treatment for their own grandchild. The story was so unusual that he wanted to help just to prove that not all adults would abandon a sick child. The legal research that Michael helped me conduct revealed something that gave me the first hope I'd felt in weeks. The delay in Ethan's diagnosis, which had contributed to his more advanced condition and need for experimental treatment, might have been preventable if our previous pediatrician had ordered the right tests when I first brought Ethan in with concerning symptoms. There was a potential malpractice case that could provide the funding we needed, but legal proceedings would take months and Ethan needed treatment immediately. Patricia Williams, the nurse who had become my closest ally, made a suggestion that seemed both desperate and brilliant. If my family could spend money on ridiculous wedding expenses and broadcast every detail on social media, why couldn't I use social media to raise money for something that actually mattered? The idea of crowdfunding for medical expenses felt humiliating, like admitting that I had failed as a mother and provider, but Patricia pointed out that asking strangers for help was no more humiliating than watching family members spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a party while refusing to help a dying child. Creating the crowdfunding campaign felt like standing naked in public and asking people to judge whether my son deserved to live. I had to write about our situation in detail, post photos of Ethan in the hospital, and essentially beg strangers to care about us more than our own family cared. The hardest part was writing the section about family support, trying to explain why we were asking strangers for help instead of relying on relatives without sounding bitter or manipulative. The first donations came from people I didn't know, small amounts from strangers who read our story and decided that a 4-year-old's life was worth more than their coffee money. $5 from a college student. $10 from a retired teacher. $20 from a single mother who understood struggling to provide medical care for a child. Each notification on my phone felt like a small miracle, proof that there were people in the world who believed children deserved to live regardless of their family's financial priorities. But my parents and Sophia weren't going to let me raise money for Ethan's treatment without a fight. Within hours of the campaign going live, I started receiving angry phone calls from family members who had been told that I was using Ethan's illness to scam money from innocent people. According to the narrative my family was spreading, the expensive treatment wasn't really necessary, and I was exploiting sympathy to fund my own irresponsible lifestyle. The family's sabotage campaign was swift and vicious. They contacted people who had donated and told them that I was lying about Ethan's condition, that the hospital was providing adequate free care, and that I was using their donations for personal expenses. They posted on social media about how disappointed they were in my behavior and how I was taking advantage of people's generosity. They actually encouraged people not to donate because it would enable my manipulation and drama. The breakthrough came when a local news reporter named Jennifer Martinez saw our crowdfunding campaign and recognized the story from a tip about wedding expenses versus medical needs. Jennifer had been covering healthcare costs and family financial crises for several years, and our situation represented everything wrong with both healthcare financing and family dysfunction. She wanted to interview me about the choice between luxury spending and life-saving treatment. The interview process was terrifying and empowering at the same time. Sitting in front of a television camera while Ethan slept in the background, I had to explain how my family could spend over $200,000 on a wedding while refusing $80,000 to save their grandson's life. I showed the hospital bills, the treatment options, and the timeline we were facing. I also showed photos from Sophia's wedding that demonstrated exactly how extravagant their spending had been. The community response to the news story was immediate and overwhelming. Local businesses started calling the hospital to offer donations and services. Churches that I'd never attended took up collections for Ethan's treatment. Schools organized fundraisers where children donated their allowance money to help another child survive cancer. The contrast between strangers' generosity and family cruelty was so stark that it felt like living in two different worlds simultaneously. The major donation that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Margaret Williams, a wealthy widow who had lost her own grandson to cancer 5 years earlier, saw our story and understood exactly what we were facing. She had fought the same battles with insurance companies and treatment costs, and she had been fortunate enough to have resources that we lacked. Her donation of $50,000 put us within reach of the experimental treatment that could save Ethan's life. Margaret's generosity came with a phone call that made me cry harder than I had since Ethan's diagnosis. She explained that she was donating not just because she wanted to help Ethan, but because she was horrified that a family would choose wedding expenses over cancer treatment. According to Margaret, who had been married for 62 years before her husband's death, no wedding was worth more than a child's life, and any family that believed otherwise had fundamentally misunderstood the meaning of both weddings and family. The turning point in our fundraising campaign happened when the story started spreading beyond our local community. People across the country began sharing our story and contributing to Ethan's treatment fund. The donations ranged from $5 to $5,000, but every contribution represented someone who believed that a 4-year-old boy deserved the chance to grow up regardless of his family's financial priorities. The viral moment that changed everything happened when someone shared our story alongside photos from Sophia's wedding, creating a side-by-side comparison that made the family's priorities impossible to ignore. The wedding photos showed crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, helicopter arrivals, and designer everything, while the hospital photos showed a 4-year-old boy fighting cancer surrounded by medical equipment and worried adults. The visual contrast was so stark that it spoke louder than any words could about the choice my family had made. Within 24 hours, the story had been shared thousands of times across multiple social media platforms. People weren't just donating to Ethan's treatment fund, they were expressing outrage at my family's behavior and demanding to know how grandparents could prioritize party planning over their grandson's survival. The comments ranged from supportive to furious to heartbroken, but they all shared the same basic sentiment that children's lives should always come before luxury celebrations. The media attention escalated when national news outlets picked up the story. Jennifer Martinez's original local news piece became the foundation for investigations by major networks who wanted to explore the broader issues of healthcare costs and family responsibility. I found myself being interviewed by reporters from across the country, all asking the same question in different ways. How could a family spend more on a wedding than most people's annual salaries while refusing to help save a child's life? My parents' initial response to the media attention was predictable and pathetic. They released a statement through Sophia's college roommate claiming that the situation was being misrepresented, that they had offered appropriate support, and that I was using media manipulation to avoid taking responsibility for my own financial situation. According to their version of events, they were the victims of a vindictive daughter who was willing to exploit her sick child for attention and money. Sophia's involvement in the damage control campaign revealed just how completely she had inherited our parents' capacity for self-centered cruelty. She posted a long statement on social media about how hurt she was that her wedding celebration was being used to attack her family, how proud she was of her parents for giving her such a beautiful day, and how disappointed she was that I had chosen to make her marriage about my personal problems. The legal threat came next, delivered through a lawyer who specialized in defamation cases. My parents threatened to sue me for damaging their reputation and causing emotional distress through false statements about their financial choices. The irony of threatening legal action for telling the truth about their behavior was apparently lost on them, but the threat itself revealed how desperate they were becoming as public opinion turned against them. The community rally that emerged in response to their legal threats was unprecedented in my experience. Local lawyers offered free representation if I needed help defending against my family's lawsuit. Business owners who had provided services for Sophia's wedding started publicly distancing themselves from the family and offering support for Ethan's treatment fund. The country club that had hosted the rehearsal dinner actually issued a statement saying they were horrified to learn how the money for that event could have been used instead. The wedding vendors' public responses created a domino effect that destroyed my family's social standing in ways that money couldn't repair. The florist who had charged $12,000 for arrangements posted about how those same flowers could have purchased 3 months of children's cancer medications. The caterer who had provided the $25,000 rehearsal dinner calculated how many families that money could have fed for an entire year. The venue that had charged premium rates for the reception offered to host a fundraising event for Ethan's treatment at no cost. The fundraising success exceeded everything I had ever hoped for or imagined possible. Strangers from around the world had contributed enough money not just for Ethan's experimental treatment, but for his ongoing care and the financial stability that would allow me to focus on his recovery rather than working multiple jobs to pay medical bills. The generosity of people who had never met us contrasted sharply with the cruelty of people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. Ethan's treatment began exactly 1 week after our story went viral, funded entirely by the kindness of strangers and the basic human decency that my family had failed to demonstrate. Dr. Hayes was cautiously optimistic about his response to the experimental protocol, and seeing him finally receive the best possible care felt like watching a miracle happen in real time. The treatment that my family had deemed too expensive and unnecessary was giving my son his best chance at a full life. The financial consequences for my parents became apparent as the weeks passed and their social ostracism continued. The mortgage payments on their house, already strained by wedding expenses, became impossible when my father's business relationships began suffering from the negative publicity. People who had respected them for 30 years were suddenly questioning their character and reconsidering their professional associations. The cost of their choice was becoming apparent in ways they had never anticipated. Sophia's marriage began showing signs of strain almost immediately after the media attention peaked. Preston, who had seemed supportive of his new wife during the wedding planning, started expressing concerns about being associated with a family that would let a child die rather than postpone luxury spending. The fairy tale wedding that was supposed to launch their perfect life together had become a public relations nightmare that followed them everywhere. The justice that I hadn't expected to see came through the simple mechanism of social accountability. My family's names were permanently linked to their choice to prioritize a wedding over a child's life, and that association would follow them for years. They had gotten their perfect wedding day, but the cost had been their reputation, their relationships, and their standing in a community that could no longer respect people who would make such a choice. The legal resolution came when the potential malpractice case I'd discovered resulted in a settlement that provided ongoing medical coverage for Ethan and financial compensation for the delays in his treatment. The settlement wasn't about getting rich, it was about ensuring that my son would never again be denied medical care because of financial limitations. The security of knowing he could receive treatment regardless of cost was worth more than any amount of money my family might have given us. Part 10, Healing and New Beginning. 6 months after beginning the experimental treatment that my family had deemed too expensive, Ethan's latest test results showed something that Dr. Hayes called the best possible outcome. The cancer was in complete remission, his blood counts were normal, and his prognosis for long-term survival was excellent. Watching my son run around the hospital playground with energy I hadn't seen since before his diagnosis felt like witnessing his resurrection from the dead. The success of Ethan's treatment validated every decision I had made in defiance of my family's priorities. The experimental protocol they had dismissed as unnecessary luxury had quite literally saved his life, and the fundraising efforts they had tried to sabotage had made his survival possible. The strangers who had contributed to our campaign had invested in a future that my own parents had been unwilling to support, and that investment was paying dividends in the form of a healthy, happy child. Patricia Williams and Michael Chen had become more than allies in our fight for Ethan's survival. They had become the chosen family that blood relations had failed to be. Patricia attended Ethan's follow-up appointments like a grandmother who actually cared about his well-being. Michael helped me navigate the ongoing financial aspects of cancer survivorship with patience and expertise that my own father had never shown for my problems. These virtual strangers had provided more genuine support than my relatives had offered in 4 years. The community that had rallied around us during the crisis continued to be part of our lives long after the immediate emergency had passed. Margaret Williams, the widow whose generous donation had made Ethan's treatment possible, invited us to family dinners and holiday celebrations. Local businesses that had supported our fundraising continued to check on Ethan's progress and celebrate his milestones. The child who had been abandoned by his grandparents was surrounded by honorary grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who had chosen to love him. The legal resolution of the malpractice case provided more than financial security. It provided validation that the delays in Ethan's diagnosis had been preventable and that we deserved compensation for the additional trauma those delays had caused. The settlement established a medical fund that would cover Ethan's ongoing cancer surveillance and any future health needs related to his treatment. He would never again be denied medical care because of insurance limitations or family indifference. My parents' consequences continued to compound as their mortgage problems escalated into foreclosure proceedings. The house they had risked on Sophia's wedding was being repossessed by the bank, and their retirement savings had been depleted by legal fees from their failed attempt to sue me for defamation. The financial security they had sacrificed for one day of celebration was gone permanently, and they were facing poverty in their golden years. Sophia's marriage crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and Preston's growing discomfort with being associated with her family's choices. The fairy tale wedding that cost over $200,000 had produced a marriage that lasted less than 2 years before ending in an expensive divorce. The perfect day they had prioritized over a child's life had failed to create the perfect life they had imagined, and the cost of that day continued to haunt them financially and socially. My decision to maintain complete no contact with my biological family was validated every day by Ethan's continued health and happiness. The people who had abandoned us during our darkest hour had proven that they were incapable of unconditional love, and protecting my son from their conditional affection was one of the most important parenting decisions I had ever made. He deserved to be surrounded by people who celebrated his survival rather than people who had been willing to accept his death. The foundation I established with a portion of the settlement money began helping other families facing similar crises. The Rebecca and Ethan Martinez Foundation provided emergency funding for experimental cancer treatments that insurance companies deemed too expensive or investigational. Every family we helped validated the decision to transform our trauma into something that could prevent other children from being denied life-saving care because of financial limitations. The personal growth that emerged from our crisis surprised me with its depth and resilience. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, resourcefulness I had never needed to develop, and the ability to create family connections that were deeper than blood relations. The woman who had once depended on her parents' approval had become someone who could save her child's life through sheer determination and the kindness of strangers. Ethan's recovery became a symbol of hope for other families fighting childhood cancer, and his story inspired donations and support for cancer research and treatment accessibility. The child whose life my family had deemed less important than party decorations had become a beacon of survival and resilience for parents facing similar battles. His existence proved that children could survive and thrive when adults made the right choices about priorities and love. The life lesson that emerged from our experience was both heartbreaking and liberating. Blood relations don't guarantee love, loyalty, or support, but chosen families can provide all three in abundance. The family that had given birth to me had failed every test of character and compassion, but the family we had created through crisis and kindness was stronger than any biological connection could ever be. Looking back at the choice between attending Sophia's wedding and staying at Ethan's bedside, I realized that it had never really been a choice at all. Love doesn't require difficult decisions between celebration and survival. Love makes those decisions automatic and obvious. The family that forced me to choose had revealed that their love was conditional and limited, while the family that supported us had proven that love can be infinite and unconditional. As I watch Ethan play in our backyard today, healthy and happy and surrounded by people who genuinely care about his welfare, I understand that losing the family I was born into helped me find the family I was meant to have. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most painful experiences, and sometimes being abandoned by the wrong people makes room for being embraced by the right ones. What would you have done if your family chose party planning over your child's life? How do you think families should prioritize spending when faced with medical emergencies versus celebrations? Have you ever had to choose between toxic family members and your children's well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear from parents who understand that protecting our children sometimes means protecting them from the very people who should love them most. If this story touched your heart or made you appreciate the family members who truly support you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming impossible odds and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that blood relations don't define family, love and loyalty do. Thank you for being part of Ethan's journey to healing, and remember that sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into.